Russia has made history by announcing a $535 million silver purchase for its state reserves, marking the first time in modern financial history that a central bank has publicly declared such a move during the current precious metals bull market. And this is your wake-up call that the rules of the game have fundamentally changed. While the mainstream media continues to tell you that silver is just an industrial metal, I'm going to show you the mathematical proof that silver has become the last resort currency in the final stage of the empire collapse algorithm. And the receipts are all here. With global debt reaching $318 trillion and the system mathematically imploding, this move is the clearest signal yet of the great reset that's coming for your savings. You need to understand something right now. This is not a prediction. This is a historical certainty. And the clock is ticking on your ability to protect what you have worked your entire life to build. The question isn't whether the system will collapse. The question is whether you'll be positioned on the right side of the greatest wealth transfer in human history when it does. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Russia's silver purchase is the canary in the coal mine that the elites don't want you to see. Let me show you the four-stage economic pattern that has played out in every major empire collapse over the past 2,000 years. And more importantly, let me show you exactly where we are right now in that cycle. Because what's happening isn't random, it's a mathematical algorithm that's been running since the fall of Rome, and we're now entering the final stage. So why is Russia pivoting to silver instead of gold right now? Because smart money understands that gold has reached a price point beyond the reach of ordinary people. And silver remains the only safe haven where the average person can still protect their wealth from what's coming. The silver market is currently experiencing its fifth consecutive year of supply deficit, with the 2024 deficit alone reaching 215 million ounces. And this isn't just about supply and demand. This is about the mathematical impossibility of maintaining current consumption levels. When you understand that modern civilization is umbilically connected to silver in ways that have no substitute, from solar panels to electric vehicles, from artificial intelligence data centers to military missile systems, there is no replacement for silver, and Russia knows this. With this move, Russia isn't just buying an asset, they're launching a physical resource war against the West's digital dollar system. And they're doing it right now while you're being told everything is fine. The mainstream financial media won't tell you this because their entire business model depends on keeping you locked into paper assets that are about to evaporate. But the mathematical reality is undeniable. Physical silver is being systematically removed from available supply, while paper claims on silver continue to multiply exponentially. Think about it like this. Imagine you're at a party where the host has printed 100 tickets for a raffle, but there are only 10 actual prizes. And everyone believes their ticket is as good as anyone else's, until the moment comes to claim the prize and 90 people discover their tickets are worthless. That's exactly what's happening in the silver market right now, except the stakes aren't a raffle prize. The stakes are your entire financial future, and Russia just showed you they're moving to claim their physical prize before the music stops. Now here's where it gets truly terrifying, and I need you to pay close attention because this is where the mathematical certainty becomes impossible to ignore. Russia is not acting alone in this strategic pivot. China issued a directive in November 2023 to all state-owned enterprises, giving them exactly 3 years to withdraw from Western markets, and that deadline expires in November 2026. You need to understand what this means in practical terms. We're talking about an $8 trillion capital flight from global markets, a controlled demolition of Western financial dominance, and it's happening on a precise timeline that you can mark on your calendar. China and Russia are watching the US dollar buckle under a debt load that increases by $70,840 every single second, and they're systematically divesting from paper promises like treasury bonds and reallocating into physical assets like silver. Let me put that in perspective for you. $70,840 per second means that in the time it takes you to watch this video, the U.S. national debt will increase by millions of dollars. And unlike you, who has to actually earn money to pay off your credit card, the government just prints more money, which devalues every dollar you've saved. China already controls over 80% of global solar panel production. And every single one of those panels requires silver, which means whoever controls silver controls the future of energy and technology. This isn't speculation. This is strategic resource positioning for the post-dollar world. And if you think your 401k filled with paper stocks is going to protect you when this shift accelerates, you're making the same mistake that millions of people made before every major currency collapse in history. Let me walk you through the four-stage economic pattern that has repeated itself for 2,000 years, from Rome to Weimar Germany to every empire that has ever risen and fallen, because understanding this pattern is the only way you'll comprehend where we are right now and what's coming next. Stage one is prosperity through sound money. This is when an empire builds its power on real assets, actual gold. And silver coins? physical wealth that cannot be printed or manipulated. And this creates genuine economic growth because value is tied to something tangible. Rome started here, America started here with the gold standard. Every great power starts here. Stage 2 is credit expansion and early debt. The empire starts borrowing to fund wars, social programs, infrastructure projects. And initially, this works because the empire's credit is good backed by real wealth and productive capacity, and people believe in the system. Stage 3 is currency debasement and loss of confidence. This is where the empire realizes it can't pay its debts with real money, so it starts debasing the currency. And Rome did this by reducing silver content in coins from 95% to eventually just 5%. While modern governments do it by printing trillions of dollars out of thin air, and the result is always the same. Inflation destroys the purchasing power of ordinary people, while the elites who own hard assets get richer. And finally, stage 4 is desperate resource. Acquisition and collapse. This is where we are right now, where empires in their death throes desperately grab for physical resources because they know the paper system is finished. And this is exactly what Russia's $535 million silver purchase represents. With U.S. national debt at $38.4 trillion and annual interest payments exceeding $1 trillion, the empire cannot survive by printing paper money anymore. And just like Rome debasing its silver coins, the modern system is stealing your savings through invisible taxation called inflation. You need to understand that the smart money has already left the building, and I'm going to prove it to you with facts that the mainstream media refuses to report. Billionaires and ultra-high net worth individuals are systematically relocating to Singapore, and the UAE moving their wealth out of Western financial systems. And these aren't random decisions. These are calculated moves by people who have access to information and financial advisors that you don't. Meanwhile, central banks, the very institutions that control the money supply and understand the system better than anyone, are stockpiling physical silver and gold in preparation for the storm they know is coming. When the people who create the rules of the game start breaking their own rules to protect themselves, that should tell you everything you need to know about what's really happening behind the curtain. The Federal Reserve tells you inflation is under control, that the economy is strong, that your dollar is safe, but their actions tell a completely different story. They're not buying treasury bonds anymore, they're reducing their balance sheet, and foreign central banks are dumping U.S. debt at record rates. Let me translate that for you in terms you can understand. Imagine you loaned money to a friend, and you notice that your friend's other creditors are all demanding their money back immediately and refusing to loan him anymore. Would you loan that friend additional money, or would you try to get your money back as quickly as possible? That's exactly what's happening on a global scale. With the US dollar right now, and Russia's silver purchase, is their way of getting their money back in the form of something that will actually hold value when the paper system collapses. The structural break in the silver market that we are witnessing right now is the moment when the paper market capitulates to physical reality. And this is a concept that most people don't understand because they've been conditioned to think of wealth in terms of numbers on a screen rather than physical assets they can hold. Let me explain how the paper silver market works and why it's about to implode. There are multiple claims on every ounce of physical silver that exists, meaning that banks and financial institutions have sold paper contracts promising to deliver silver that they don't actually have in their vaults. And this works fine as long as everyone is willing to accept paper promises instead of demanding physical delivery. But the moment that Russia, China, and other major players start demanding physical delivery, the entire fraud is exposed, and the price of physical silver will necessarily diverge massively from the paper price. Think of it like a bank run. Your money is supposedly safe in the bank, but the bank doesn't actually have your money sitting in a vault. They've loaned it out to other people, and as long as everyone doesn't ask for their money at the same time, the system works. But the moment that everyone shows up demanding their deposits simultaneously, the bank collapses because the money simply doesn't exist. That's what's happening in the silver market right now, and Russia's public announcement of their purchase is essentially them showing up to the bank and demanding physical delivery, which forces everyone else to ask themselves whether they should do the same before it's too late. Now I need to address the elephant in the room that the mainstream media absolutely refuses to discuss, and that's the role of energy in this entire equation. Because silver isn't just a monetary metal, it's the linchpin of the entire green energy transition that governments around the world are mandating. Every solar panel requires approximately 20 grams of silver, and with governments pushing aggressive renewable energy targets, the demand for silver is about to explode beyond anything we've seen in history. The International Energy Agency projects that solar installations will need to triple by 2030 to meet climate goals. And that means silver demand from just the solar industry alone will consume nearly all available supply. But here's the kicker that nobody's talking about. The silver used in solar panels is gone forever, It cannot be economically recovered and recycled, which means, unlike gold, which gets recycled and stays in circulation, silver is being consumed and removed from available supply permanently. And this isn't even accounting for electric vehicles, which require significantly more silver than traditional vehicles, or 5G infrastructure, or AI data centers that are proliferating around the world. China understands this, which is why they're controlling solar panel production. And Russia understands this, which is why they're buying physical silver right now while the price is still being suppressed by paper manipulation. The mathematical equation is simple. Increasing demand plus decreasing supply equals higher prices. And when you add in the currency collapse factor where people flee from devaluing paper money into hard assets, you get a price explosion that most people won't see coming until it's already happened. Let me give you some concrete numbers that prove we're in stage 4 of the collapse algorithm right now, because this isn't about fear-mongering. This is about mathematical reality that you can verify for yourself. The U.S. national debt is $38.4 trillion, which is approximately 114% of GDP. And history shows that when government debt exceeds 90% of GDP, economic growth slows dramatically, and the risk of sovereign default increases exponentially. But it gets worse. Unfunded liabilities, which include Social Security, Medicare, and government pensions, add another $175 trillion to the real debt picture, bringing the total to over $213 trillion in obligations that the U.S. government has no mathematical way to pay without destroying the currency. Let me put this in terms of your personal finances so you understand the severity. If you made $100,000 per year, but you owed $114,000 on your credit card, plus another $175,000 in other debts you'd promised to pay, and your debt was increasing by $7,840 every single day, you would be mathematically bankrupt. And the only way you could continue making payments would be to take out more credit cards, which is exactly what the government is doing by issuing more treasury bonds. Eventually, the credit cards stop working, lenders stop lending, and the whole house of cards collapses. That's not a prediction, that's mathematical certainty. And Russia's silver purchase is their acknowledgement that they understand the math, and they're preparing for the inevitable outcome. The gaslighting that you're experiencing right now from the mainstream financial media is intentional and systematic, designed to keep you invested in a system that's extracting your wealth while you sleep. They'll tell you that inflation is under control, that we've achieved a soft landing, that the stock market hitting new highs means the economy is strong, but none of that addresses the underlying mathematical insolvency of the system. Real inflation, measured the way it was calculated in the 1980s before the government changed the methodology to hide the truth, is running at approximately 12 to 15% annually, which means your purchasing power is being cut in half every 5 to 6 years. That's not a recession, that's not a downturn, that's systematic wealth confiscation through currency debasement, and it's the exact same strategy that Rome used in stage 3 of their collapse when they reduced the silver content in their denarius coins. The only difference is that modern governments can hide it behind complex financial instruments and digital transactions, whereas Romans could literally see and feel the quality of their coins degrading. You can't see the digital debasement of your dollars, but you can feel it every time you go to the grocery store. And your money buys less than it did last year, and the year before, and the year before that. The social contract that said, if you work hard, save your money, and invest responsibly, you'll be able to retire comfortably, has been systematically broken, and Russia's silver purchase is a signal that major global powers have given up on the current system and are positioning for what comes next. Now let me show you why the November 2026 deadline for Chinese state-owned enterprises to exit Western markets is the most important date you need to have marked on your calendar. Because this is when the controlled demolition of the current financial system accelerates into something that cannot be hidden or managed by central bank intervention. China holds approximately $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds, and while they've been slowly reducing that position for years, the 2026 deadline represents a point of no return where massive capital flows will reverse direction completely. Think about what happens when $8 trillion starts flowing out of Western markets. Stock prices fall, bond yields spike, the dollar weakens, and the Federal Reserve is forced to choose between letting interest rates rise, which would bankrupt the government and crash the economy, or printing more money to buy the bonds that China is selling, which accelerates inflation and destroys the currency. Either path leads to the same destination, a currency crisis that will make 2008 look like a minor correction, and the people who will be hurt most are those who kept their wealth in paper assets denominated in devaluing currencies. Russia is showing you exactly what the smart move is right now. Exchange paper promises for physical assets that cannot be printed, debased, or inflated away. Silver, unlike stocks or bonds or even real estate in certain jurisdictions, cannot be seized by a keystroke, cannot be diluted by monetary policy, and cannot be destroyed by government decree. I want to address something that I know many of you are thinking right now, but silver prices have been suppressed for decades. Why would it be different this time? And that's actually the most important question you can ask, because the answer reveals the fundamental shift that's happening in global power structures right now. Silver prices have been suppressed through paper market manipulation, where large banks sell massive quantities of paper silver contracts with no intention of ever delivering physical metal, and this creates artificial supply that pushes prices down. This manipulation has been documented. Banks have been fined for it, and yet it continues because it serves the interests of governments that want to suppress precious metals prices to maintain confidence in fiat currencies. But here's what's different now. The physical supply situation has deteriorated to the point where the manipulation cannot continue without completely breaking the market. When Russia publicly announces a $535 million silver purchase and demands physical delivery, they're essentially calling the bluff of the paper manipulators, forcing them to either deliver the physical metal, which exposes the fraud, or default on their contracts, which destroys confidence in the entire system. China has been doing this quietly for years, accumulating physical gold and silver while selling paper dollars. And now Russia is doing it publicly, which signals that we've entered a new phase where major powers are no longer playing by the old rules. The paper manipulation game only works when everyone agrees to accept paper promises instead of demanding physical delivery. And that agreement is breaking down right now in real time. Let me connect all of these dots for you in a way that makes the urgency absolutely clear, because time is the one resource you cannot get back, and the window for protecting your wealth is closing rapidly. We have mathematical proof that the current system is insolvent. 38.4 trillion in official debt, 175 trillion in unfunded liabilities, annual deficits exceeding $1 trillion, and interest payments that consume an increasingly large percentage of tax revenue. We have historical proof that every empire that reached this level of debt relative to GDP has suffered currency collapse. Rome, Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina. The list goes on, and the pattern is always the same. We have supply-demand proof that silver is in a structural deficit that cannot be resolved at current prices. 5 consecutive years of deficits totaling over 700 million ounces, increasing industrial demand from green energy and technology, and declining mine production as easy to extract silver deposits are depleted. And now we have geopolitical proof that major powers are positioning for the endgame. Russia is public silver purchase. China's 2026 withdrawal deadline. BRICS nations. Developing alternative payment systems to bypass the dollar and smart money fleeing to Singapore and UAE. All of these factors are converging simultaneously. And when you understand the 4-stage collapse pattern, you realize that we're not in the early stages, where you have time to prepare. We're in stage 4, where desperate resource acquisition signals that the end is near. The mainstream media will continue to tell you that everything is fine, that the economy is resilient, that the Federal Reserve has everything under control. But their job isn't to inform you. Their job is to prevent panic and maintain confidence in a system that's mathematically doomed. Think about it logically. If the media told you tomorrow that the dollar was going to collapse and you should immediately convert your savings into physical assets, what would happen? Everyone would rush to do the same thing simultaneously, which would trigger the very collapse they're trying to prevent. So instead, they feed you a steady diet of reassuring narratives, while the elites quietly position themselves for what's coming. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is basic self-preservation by the people who understand how the system works, and you can see the evidence in their actions if you know where to look. When billionaires are buying farmland, when central banks are buying gold and silver, when major corporations are moving headquarters to tax-friendly jurisdictions, when wealthy individuals are acquiring second passports, these aren't random coincidences. These are coordinated preparations for a system change that they know is inevitable. The question you need to ask yourself is, are you going to wait for the mainstream media to tell you it's time to act, by which point it will be too late? Or are you going to look at the mathematical evidence and the historical patterns and make your own informed decision right now while you still can? Let me be absolutely clear about what I'm not saying, because I want you to understand this is based on historical analysis and mathematical certainty, not wild speculation. I'm not saying the world is going to end. I'm not saying society is going to collapse into chaos. I'm not saying you should panic and make irrational decisions. What I am saying is that we are witnessing a historical wealth transfer from those who hold paper assets to those who hold physical assets, from those who trust the system to protect them to those who take responsibility for protecting themselves, and from those who ignore the warnings to those who understand the 4-stage pattern and act accordingly. Throughout history, the people who survived currency collapses were not the wealthiest or the most connected. They were the ones who understood that paper wealth can disappear overnight, but physical assets retain value through any crisis. In Weimar Germany, people who held marks in the bank saw their life savings become worthless, unable to buy a loaf of bread, while those who had converted to physical goods maintained their purchasing power. In Zimbabwe, people who trusted the official banking system lost everything, while those who held physical assets or foreign currency survived. In Argentina and Venezuela, in every currency crisis throughout history, the pattern is always the same. Paper promises fail, and physical reality prevails. Russia's $535 million silver purchase is not just a financial transaction. It's a declaration that the old system is dead, and the transition to a new paradigm has begun. And you need to understand what this means for your personal financial situation right now. If you have your retirement savings in a 401k or IRA invested in stocks and bonds denominated in dollars, you are holding paper claims on companies that are valued in a currency that is being systematically devalued. If you have cash in a savings account earning 4% interest while real inflation is running at 12 to 15%, you are losing purchasing power every single day. If you own real estate with a mortgage, you might think you're hedged against inflation, but if the currency collapses and the economy contracts, property values can fall dramatically while your debt remains constant. The only way to truly protect your wealth in stage 4 of the collapse algorithm is to own physical assets that have intrinsic value, independent of any government's promises. Precious metals like silver and gold, productive assets like farmland, or businesses that generate real goods and services and skills and knowledge that will retain value regardless of the monetary system. This is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, but I am showing you the historical pattern and the mathematical reality, and what you do with that information is your decision to make. The timeline is accelerating, and you can see it in the frequency and magnitude of the signals if you're paying attention. Russia's silver purchase in January 2025, China's November 2026 deadline, BRICS nations planning to launch a commodity-backed currency, central banks around the world buying gold at record pace. These aren't isolated events, these are coordinated movements in a chess game where the objective is to position before the board is reset. The most important thing you need to understand is that there will not be a clear moment where a bell rings and someone announces that the transition is happening. It will be gradual and then suddenly spread out over months and years until one day you wake up and realize that the rules have completely changed and you're either positioned correctly or you're not. The people who wait for certainty before acting will be the last to act. And by definition, they will be acting at the worst possible prices after the opportunity has already passed. The people who understand that stage 4 has already begun and take action now, while prices are still being suppressed by paper manipulation, will be the ones who preserve their wealth through the transition. Subscribe now if you want to see the truth and survive what's coming, because the mainstream media will never give you this information, and by the time they acknowledge the problem, it will already be too late for you to act. Remember, this is not a prediction. This is a mathematical certainty based on 2,000 years of historical patterns, and the clock is ticking on your window of opportunity to protect what you have worked your entire life to build. The empire collapse algorithm doesn't care about your politics, your opinions, or your hopes for the future. It's a mathematical pattern that has repeated itself throughout history, and we are now in stage 4, where desperate resource acquisition signals that the end is near. Russia just showed you their hand, China has given you their timeline, and the smart money has already left the building. The only question that matters now is, what are you going to do with this information before the window closes completely?